both in India and the world, and how are we handling it, and how is the rest of the world also handling it. I want to just start off by showing you this, small detail about the genetic makeup of this entire virus. What is important to note is that there are some significant differences between the SARS group of viruses to which this belongs and this particular novel coronavirus. At least around 380 amino acid substitutions are there. I'm not sure if you can see the arrow on the screen, but this is the structure of the novel coronavirus. Now, these genomic characteristics are very important to understand the pathogenesis of the virus and why it is so effective and effective in terms of causing this condition. If you know, there is a factor called as the R naught, which is the rate of reproduction of a virus. Normally, if you look at it, any person, if he infects another person, the R naught would be 1. But this virus, actually, one person can infect up to 3. So it's a compounded sort of an infection. And if one person is untreated, in a matter of 40 days, he or she can infect almost around 400 to 450 people. So that's the magnitude which we are facing. As compared to the other viruses, SARS had a R naught of around 1.3. Influenza viruses are having an R naught of maybe around 1 or slightly under 1. But this one is substantially more. And that's the reason why this is so virulent. Now, this is the latest figure in terms of how the globe is affected and what is happening in India. Almost close to 4 million cases in the world with 275,000 deaths. And if you look at India, it's almost 60,000 people are affected with almost close to 2,000 deaths. So India is almost on the path of what other Western and Eastern European countries have been going through, unless we take major steps right now. But look at it in terms of the, I just need to hide something here because it keeps coming back, sorry. Yeah. In terms of the cases per million people, if you actually look at it, India would still be less, between 5 and 10, as compared to, let's say, the US or the other parts of the world, where you have almost more than 2,000 to 5,000 cases per million people. There are various reasons why this is happening. And there are various theories propounded as to why in a country of 1.3 billion people, we have such a low rate of infection. So if you actually look at this chart, the maximum number of cases of the 4 million cases are happening in the United States. Almost 1/3 of the cases in the world are happening in the US. Spain has around 7, Italy has around 5.5, the UK around 5. Russia is now jumping almost every day with more than 10,000 cases, close to 5. France is also close to 5. Germany is 4. And you see India way down at 1.49. So we do not know whether it is a matter of time or whether the current lockdown and mitigation measures will succeed in keeping the caseload to a low level. But this is the current situation in the world. And China, from where it all started, is at 2%. Of course, we don't know how much of this is true in terms of the feedback from China, in terms of how much they have been affected. But data which has been revealed to the WHO shows that they had only 83,000 cases. Now, what is happening in India? If you look at the total confirmed cases, while we can't say that it's an exponential curve, the fact is that over the past 3 months, from March to now, we got close to around 60,000 plus cases. And the daily new cases are also increasing. You can see at the bottom that it's increasing daily, except that I see a little bit of blip in the last couple of days to a downward direction. Whether that will sustain or not, we do not know. But while it is not exponential, it is still a great matter of concern. And if you look at the daily number of confirmed cases, we are now having almost 3,000 to 3,500 per day. And that is not good. The lockdown was actually instituted on the 5th of March. And after that, there have been a couple of extensions so that it goes on till May 17. There have been various predictions of how the lockdown will flatten the curve. But while we are not seeing an exponential growth, we are seeing a linear growth, which is now a cause of worry. And unless our mitigation measures bear fruit in the next couple of weeks or 3 weeks, we should be in for a little bit of trouble as far as this is concerned. Now let's look at the total case of confirmed cases of COVID-19. The main one is in terms of United States. I just showed you, more than 1 million cases are there in the United States itself. Then you have Spain, Italy, UK, Germany, France, India, and Singapore. So while the India curve actually seems quite reasonable in terms of a linear growth down here, and the US growth is almost, it is exponential, we still can't be taking it lightly, because we still have a gap of 2 or 3 months between Europe and US and what is happening in India. So everyone is going to watch us very closely in terms of how do we handle this pandemic in India. Now, this is a very, very important test in terms of telling you how many tests are we performing for 1,000 people. You would have heard the WHO chief to actually say that the only way to control this pandemic is first of all to test, test, and test. There is nothing more important than testing people to find out the caseload which someone is carrying as far as this is concerned. If you look at Russia, they're getting 10,000 cases every day. Maybe this is a result of much more testing. You can see the other tests which is happening across UK, South Africa, South Korea, and India, for instance. It is still not that great. You still have, in terms of per 1,000 people, you would probably have around 0.06, 0.1. So we still are at a low level of testing. Of course, we have reasons for testing to this section because we have a standard protocol which we use. But it is imperative that we start testing more people to find out what is the caseload. And the reason why I'm saying is that for those of you who are well aware of the viral characteristic, this virus, if you look at it, it is now proven that almost 40 to 50% of the people can be asymptomatic and transmit the disease. They have very mild or no illness at all, but they are capable of replicating the virus and transmitting to other people. Now look at the COVID tests per 1,000 people. And again, you look at India, it is still, inching up very slowly. It is not that we are getting 3,500 cases a day and we are really jumped up to testing and jump started and, pushed it around. One reason, of course, is the fact that the PCR kits are available not in great quantities. We did go the antibody route, but all of you know that the antibody test kits which came showed a lot of false positives and false negatives, and that has actually put a dampener in terms of confirming them with the PCR test also. But the countries which test well are Denmark, Italy, and Germany. Of course, they had no choice but to go in for this, and the US also have no choice. But South Korea also did a lot of testing, including drive-in testing. Now, let's look at the total. I need to just change the bar here. Just bear with me for a minute. Yeah. So the total tests conducted versus the confirmed cases per million. What you see is that the bars which you see running diagonally across are the number of cases as a multiple of the number of tests which you do. For instance, if India does only 1,000 tests, you will actually find that the number of cases would be 5 times more, 6 times more. Similarly, if you look at other countries, Mexico doing less than 800, they would actually be growing between 2 to 3. So testing only tells you a little bit about what is happening, but the number of cases are significantly more in any country as compared to the number of tests which you do. And this is an important chart to show if you perform, let us say, 100 case tests, how many will you get positive? One of the best indicators that the country is flattening the curve and getting out of it is to say that you perform a lot of tests, but hardly a few people are tested as positive. And the classical example here is that of New Zealand. You can see now what is happening. They are performing huge number of tests, and only then will they get one positive case, which means that there is hardly any infection in the country. But if you go down and you see what is happening as far as India is concerned, we are performing, India is this curve, the sort of a magenta blue curve. I'll just take you back again. And we started off by having to do 60 tests to get one case positive. Now actually what is happening is that we are doing almost 30 tests and we are getting one case positive. That means we have still not got it under control. Maybe the reason is that we are now started to detect a lot of asymptomatics, but even then, some states are doing far better than other states within India. This is an overall India picture, but this is a very, very important ratio to understand how the world is tackling coronavirus through proper testing, and how one of the indicators that a country is actually flattening the curve comes from the fact that you get very few cases for every test which you do. Now, this, of course, I must thank Dr. Rajiv Jain for sharing this with me. What is happening here is that the same principle in the states in India, rates of positive cases to overall tested, and you can actually find that states like Maharashtra, the number of cases are actually increasing for all the tests instead of coming down. But if you look at Jammu and Kashmir, it's coming down. Assam is actually coming down. You can have a look at many of these cases. Delhi came down and then it's gone back up again. And I think now the best place, which I'm not seeing that in this chart, but Kerala is the one which has probably got it under control. There were hardly any cases for many days till one case which probably came yesterday. Now I changed the focus from tests to actually the number of deaths and what is happening in the whole world. The maximum number of deaths have happened in North America, which is around 80,000. And then you have UK, Italy, Spain, France, Brazil, And last, we have India close to around 2000 deaths. But the case fatality ratio, even in India, is very less as compared to the rest of the world. And I'll just see if I can show you what is the sort of a thing. But let's first look at this. How rapidly are these, deaths actually increasing? And I will try and see if I can show my arrow here. If you can see it, India is in the box between 1000 and 10,000 and between 40 and 60 on the x-axis. So what is happening is that we aren't flattening the curve even as far as the deaths are concerned. You can see a steady increase in deaths in India. The countries which have actually got a grip on taking care of the cases as well as the deaths are countries like South Korea and all the others, including Singapore and all seen in this chart. So one of the 2-3 criteria are very important when you look at a country. One is, are the cases decreasing? Second is, are the deaths decreasing? And the third important criteria is, do the hospitals have enough bed to be able to handle any surge? Therefore, when I come to my other portion where I talk to you about people going back to work and easement in different parts of the world, Germany wants to get back to work, Sweden wants to get back to work, all these European countries want to get back to work. The main criteria which they follow is the WHO criteria of looking at cases, deaths, and hospital ratio. And the fourth one, which is very important, is number of tests. And in that also, not the absolute number, but number of positive tests for every 100 tests done. So these are the criteria in which people actually look at the progress of the disease. Now, are we bending the curve? Now, this is a very, very important thing. And one of the ways when you know you're bending the curve is that your death rate starts coming down significantly. Here, if you look at it, you look at India here, it's still on the upward trajectory as far as deaths are concerned. But if you look at Iran, it peaked and now it's on a downward territory. Turkey peaked sometime back at around 100 plus. It is on a downward territory. And all this, South Korea, of course, was the earliest one to bring it down. So this is another way of looking in terms of flattening the curve or bending the curve. Now, if you look at the case fatality of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, the maximum case fatality is in France, almost around 20%. And I'll tell you the reason why they had such a high fatality. UK is still struggling around 15%. Italy and Spain and Iran and United States also more than 6%, and Germany. But India actually is quite down here in terms of 3.5%. So essentially, we are actually trying to see whether the case fatality is impacting us in a big way, but actually it is not. Indian case fatality is quite less in terms of the overall world. But even now, we believe that there's a lot to be done in terms of the treatment protocols in some of the states in the country. Now let's look at the total confirmed COVID-19 deaths versus cases. That means how many people are actually, this is the fatality rate in a different manner. If you look at India, it is somewhere here, around 3%. UK is at a very high 10%, the same chart which I showed you previously, but put in a different axis to actually show what is happening. Now, many people ask, why is it that some countries do well, others do well, don't do so well? Especially there's a great degree of worry about what is going to happen in India. And one of the key criteria is that how many ICUs does a country have? How many ventilators does a country have? Are there specialized hospitals? And if you look at the number of beds per people, India would probably be around the low 1 to 3. That's the sort of a thing. So we just need to understand this is where India is, less than 1 probably. But if you look at the US and all, they would be up to 3. And some countries, especially Russia and all, are quite well off. The former, the socialistic and communist countries, they have built up a good public health infrastructure. And that is where you find that, they've got a different and a better capacity in terms of hospitals, in terms of ICUs, in terms of ventilators. If you ask for India in terms of ventilators as a mark of preparedness, India has a capacity of around 40,000 ventilators currently, but a number more are coming. But the topic of ventilator itself is controversial, and maybe when I answer questions on treatment, I will talk to you about how effective a ventilator really is. The other thing, why is it that Western countries are having such a huge amount of mortality is because of their population, which is age 70 and above. In Italy, almost 90% of the people who died were above the age of 75 or 80. And if you look at the US also, a huge amount of population, almost between 12 to 16% or between 8 to 12% are aged 70 and above. So population demographics plays a role, hospital capacity plays a role, hospital capability of clinicians plays a role. All these have a bearing in terms of the fatality and the mortality rate of COVID. Now I'm coming to the next part of the presentation, and which is how does a country mitigate, control, or eliminate COVID-19, or contain it. So the 3 basic principles are test, trace, and treat. You have to test as many as possible. You have to do contact tracing as many as possible. And when you find these people, you have to put them under treatment. Now, how is the ICMR, adopting the testing strategy in India? They have an evolving strategy. On the 17th of March, their guidelines were all asymptomatic people who have undertaken international travel, they should stay in quarantine for 14 days, and they only become symptomatic, they will then be tested. Then contacts of laboratory confirmed positive cases, they were to be tested. Then healthcare workers, they should be tested, especially if they are symptomatic and having cough and difficulty as per the standard in terms of coughing. Then they actually went on to do a rapid antibody testing, and this was their strategy in terms of the cluster containment and in terms of large migration gatherings or evacuee centers. So they looked at silly like symptomatic influenza-like illness, and then they would say that okay, home quarantine for 14 days, and then do a rapid antibody test. If you are negative, then if warranted, only then do an RT-PCR. Otherwise, if you are positive, then confirm it, by RT-PCR. So these were all the things which they said in terms of acute respiratory illness. And now they've also said that asymptomatic, direct and high risk contacts of a confirmed case should be tested preferably between day 5 and day 14. And the gold standard in all this for everyone is the RT-PCR, although it's only 75 to 80% of the time that a true positive is seen as a true positive. Now the government of India has a very active plan to contain, trace. Once they trace, they have this scenario and containment zone on the basis of which they operate. For instance, if there's a small cluster of cases in a closed environment, such as schools, hostels, or hospital, they will determine the zone by mapping of person, including cases and contacts. And then there's a buffer zone of additional 5-kilometer radius, where the health workers will actually keep a close watch on signs and symptoms. If there's a single cluster in a residential colony, they will actually contain it within the administrative boundary of the colony, and the buffer zone is a 5-kilometer radius. And they will do a risk assessment to find out what exactly should be the buffer zone. That's why you find so many containment zones in various parts of the country today. And that's why you find this red, green, and amber sort of a characterization. Now, if there are multiple clusters in community within an administrative jurisdiction, then the entire place, for instance, the entire Pune is now under containment. Most of Bombay is under containment. The same must be the case with Delhi also, with most of the zones being under containment. Then if there are multiple clusters which are in different administrative jurisdictions, then you look at an administrative boundary of the city and an additional area, even in the peri-urban area. And if it's in a rural setting, they look at a 3 kilometers of containment zone. What does the government of India do in terms of surveillance? They do contact tracing, mapping the containment, and testing and hospitalization where needed. And they also look at various other non-pharmaceutical interventions like social distancing, closure of theaters, colleges, cancellation of mass gatherings. All these are extremely important in terms of being able to contain the outbreak of the virus. Now, one strategy which the government has adopted is lockdown. Is it effective as a means of flattening the curve? We started off on, let's say, 25th March, extended to 14th April, and then to the 3rd of May. And I think almost on the 5th we started. Recently, this has been further extended till the May 17th. We were expecting the curve to be flattened, but there have been a lot of aspects which have ensured that the curve doesn't remain flattened. One was a huge congregation which was held in Delhi between the 15th and 30th of March. And participants in the congregation fanned out across India. And a huge Herculean task was instituted by the government of India. 9,000 such contacts of the people who attended the congregation have been traced. They have been tested. Many of them have been found positive and have been put into quarantine. So a great effort, which would otherwise have seen the number of cases not be 60,000 today, but significantly less, has been wasted because the people also have to cooperate. In any effort of the government, if people don't understand, and even now, when I look out and see about what is happening in places like Mumbai or Delhi and other places, technically there's a lockdown, but you can still find that on various functions, people just go out onto the streets as though nothing is important. Now, this was a very interesting modeling done by Oxford University, and they had forecast that if you lock down only for 21 days, just forget the numbers on the left side because the numbers can go totally wrong. Just the principle of lockdown, which says that if you have a lockdown for 21 days, as soon as you lift it, the cases will surge exponentially. And if you have a week's break between the 21 days and then follow it up by 28 days, again, the cases will really long. But what they said was that the best way of ensuring that the cases don't surge is to have the last chart, which is the lockdown for 49 days. Now, a model is only as good as the assumptions and the calculations under it. But what we have seen is that this is not the case. So what is happening actually in India is that because of the fact that we have had so many instances of people not cooperating in terms of the lockdown, and the fact is that when you look at segregation of people, when you get into a huge pocket of densely populated areas, whether it is Delhi or whether it is Mumbai, whether other places which have urban slums, the density of population, some of them can be as high as 600 to 800 people per square kilometer. And there, if you ask them to do social distancing, it's impossible. So what is the government doing? They are actually taking out people from there and putting them into different quarantine centers at government expense so that, they can at least break the chain of transmission. My personal view is that the next 3 or 4 weeks is going to be extremely crucial. And if we are not able to contain all this in the next 3 or 4 weeks and keep the lid in terms of the curve, there could be a problem for us. Now, in terms of testing, many people talk about this antibody testing as a way of mitigating, find out who are positive to the antibody. Those guys have immunity. So maybe, they can lead the way in terms of getting back to office and stuff like that. This is a misnomer. Why is this a misnomer? I just want to be sure you can hear me. Sandeep, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, because I just got some feedback that internet connection is unstable. So anyway, thanks. So, why is this a misnomer? Because what is happening is that the current antibody tests do not pick up only the novel coronavirus. They are picking up other SARS virus also. Recently, the FDA has given an end-use authorization or approval to Roche and to Abbott. And Roche's test is supposed to be 100% specific and 98% sensitive, which is extremely good. They will pick up the right cases. They will not give anything positive or negative when actually they are not. But what is going to happen is that when you want to detect for an antibody to see whether somebody has been exposed to this particular novel coronavirus, you need to wait at least for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. That is the time when the antibody reaches the peak. You can see it here. It is reaching the peak in week 3. So if officers and if your managers, if you're working somewhere, ask you to certify, somebody fit on the basis of an antibody, you can't actually do it because antibody detection happens later on only. That is one thing. Therefore, what the WHO has actually done is to come out with a statement on antibody testing, because some countries were mooting the idea of having a passport to find out who is positive and therefore has immunity and who does not have. Number one, there is no guarantee that if you develop it, your immunity will last for, let's say, 1 year or 2 years. So what the WHO has said is that there is currently no evidence that people who have recovered from COVID-19 and have antibodies are prevented or protected from a second infection. At this point in the pandemic, there is not enough evidence about the effectiveness of antibiotic-mediated immunity. People who assume they are immune to a second infection may ignore public health advice. When the new evidence becomes available, WHO will update this scientific brief. And they had to come out of this because of the fact that hundreds of companies, fly-by-night operators in the US, actually came out with tests promising to detect antibodies. So that's the one. And I just want to, maybe draw this to a conclusion before I take questions. Suppose, people want to get back to work. What is it that they need to look? Now, this is an internal Unilever model which we have prepared. I was asked to look at this from the point of view of that, doc, if one country wants to get back, when do we get back? So our principle is very clear. We will say we will not get back to work before the government does. That's the most important thing, because the public health system and everything has got to be in place before we start getting back. And then we said that after the government indication of inclination that they are opening up and they are encourage industries to go back to offices and all, we will have a 3-week period to judge whether we should do it or not. The reason being that in Germany, they opened up and immediately in 2 weeks, the cases started increasing. So they had to shut back and roll back the thing. And now they are again opening up. So to prevent the yo-yo and we have got 4 tiers, tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. And these are based on the WHO sort of guidance. Tier 4 is community transmission. Tier 3 is you have a cluster of cases. Then sporadic cases, tier 2, and no new cases is tier 1. We are happy to come back to work at tier 3 when the reproductive R0 is between 0.7 to 1. That means one person is infecting less than 1%. But what we will monitor through all this is that, are the cases and deaths over the last 14 days declining? Is the hospital capacity enough, adequate to take care of surges so that if people fall sick, they don't have to suffer? Because if your hospital capacity is under strain and you get your people back to work, and God forbid, if they catch an infection, you will be under serious trouble. And the final thing which I told you about testing capacity is extremely important, that very few positive tests as a percent of total tests is a matter of convincing us that the infection in the society is coming down to a huge extent. So we use the principle of R naught and WHO community health factors to determine what tier we are in. We are flexible in terms of offering permission to cities within countries to open up depending upon how they are. But overall, we are taking a very conservative view of this virus because we are not really sure, whether the community transmission in many places are totally under control or what is happening to this virus. The only way I think when we can be sure is if we get a good treatment as far as controlling this is concerned, or if we have the vaccine ready. These are the only two conditions when we can say with conviction that we have got the better of the virus. Till then, we have to play hide and seek with the virus like it plays with us and depend more on factors like social, physical distancing, hand washing, wearing of masks in public. I think is extremely important. It has been proven that if everybody wears a mask, your risk comes down significantly. So these are all non-pharmaceutical interventions like sanitizers, hand wash, masks, and physical distancing. So that's what actually, I wanted to talk, and I'm happy now to leave it open to Sandeep to, take it forward from here.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. So, you have given a very informative presentation regarding the current situation, and keeping the norms of the this presentation and this DigiConnect series. We have requested all the participants to put their questions in the chat box, and if they want to speak, they can raise their hand through manage participants. They can raise their hands, and I'll unmute them for taking up their questions if they want to talk physically. Yeah. Hello.
So you want me to go to the chat box, or what is it like?
First, my question is what India did and what we have not done in this COVID-19 battle. Can you just explain, sir?
Yeah. See, what we did was that we started the lockdown extremely early. I think we started it when we had just 500 cases, and that was absolutely brilliant because having started the lockdown so early, we should have seen something significantly more. But what has happened, Sandeep, and that is what I was actually telling, was that in any such event, it's a huge population of 1.3 billion. So people have to cooperate. And if you have some sections of society not cooperating, other people wanting to do their own thing, then it becomes an issue because then your lockdown has to keep on extending. That is one thing which, we probably didn't get it right in terms of what is to be done. The second one is, of course, the entire issue of the economic aspect and the human suffering associated with it. Maybe we could have done much better in terms of anticipating the human suffering and taking care of, the needs of people who were suddenly within 6 hours told that, there's nothing going to happen, everything is going to shut from 12 o'clock. So these are all experiences in hindsight. But I think for a population of 1.3 billion, managing the situation as we have done so far is commendable. The other good thing which is happening is that in many parts, we have pockets of excellence. I wouldn't say every state is doing an excellent job, but if you look at states like Kerala, they have actually done extremely well. And they have got the expertise and the experience from previous epidemics or pandemics which happened in the rest of the world, and they learned from it, like Nipah. They were able to, very, very deadly disease. They were able to quickly bring it under control. So the entire issue of contact tracing, surveillance, quarantine, and treatment has been done very well by some states. Other states have not been able to do so well. So that's what we learn. Each state needs to learn from each other. And once you have a containment zone, I think one has to be very strict about it. Then you can't have, partial lived on. The other thing which recently happened, and you are all privy to that, is that we opened up liquor stores. Social distancing went through the roof. So can we actually look at, delivery of stuff like this to people's home? We must understand that people have different needs, and with the might of the state, we can actually deliver these sort of stuff to people home so that people don't have to break social distancing norms. So these are the sort of things which I believe we did well and we didn't do well.
Yeah. So, so regarding this COVID-19, there had been past outbreaks also, like of Spanish flu or like plague. So have we learned from those outbreaks or pandemics? Any learnings from those pandemics which we can use during to mitigate this COVID-19 pandemics?
One of the biggest learning from the Spanish flu is that things have not changed. If you want to tackle an unknown enemy, you have to hide from the enemy and isolate yourself, which is what we did excellently. One of the other good things which we did was we banned travel, totally, both inward and outbound. During the time of Spanish flu and all also, it just spread rapidly because what happens is when the entire population does not have immunity, The only thing you can do is to cocoon yourself in a place where the virus can't find you. So that's what we did very good, which is what about quarantine and stuff like that. It's extremely important. Till we get a drug or a vaccine, I don't think you can do anything better than looking at these non-pharmaceutical interventions. Because if you don't do this, and if you don't have a drug, and if you don't have a vaccine, you are a sitting duck. During the time of Spanish flu and all, there were no drugs, there were no vaccines, and everybody was the sitting duck. But the principles, the sound public health principles, whether it was for Ebola or for smallpox or for Spanish flu, they still remain the same. Even today, the basic principles of hiding from the virus, quarantining yourself, isolating people who are sick, these are time-tested public health principles, and that is what we actually learned from them. But the one thing which we have not learned is that there have been enough warnings about a pandemic waiting to strike us, whether it was Bill Gates or whether it was anybody else. But I don't think anybody had anticipated. We have this global attitude of Chalta Hai, which I thought only was in India, but now I see it's almost everywhere. We will tackle it when it comes, but then it becomes too late. Now, what is happening is that because we have learned from the other pandemics, including the Ebola and stuff like that, which was not a pandemic, but we had developed something for that, whether it is Remdesivir or whether it was the vaccine for MERS, which did not take off. The phase 2 and phase 3 trials have got speeded up to a great extent. So something which would have normally taken 18 to 24 months, we are hoping will be available to us within 10 or 12 months. So that's the learning from all that has happened so far.
So you mean to say the public health measures which were there earlier also, they need to be taken care of till the time the treatment or the vaccine is available with us.
Yeah, even now, for instance, Sandeep, when the lockdown is lifted, the key thing would be that you will have to apply those principles, albeit not on a huge scale, but containment zone, hotspots. These are the areas where you need to, it is a question of, put your pedal on the brake, take it off, put it on the brake, take it off. That's the sort of a thing which is going to happen. And if God forbid, if we don't get a cure or a vaccine, this on off on the pedal is going to continue for a long time. And the other thing which will also happen is that youngsters will probably have to shield the elderly in the population. That means elderly people who are above 60 or 65, they just shouldn't venture out. And even if they do, they have to observe the great precautions. It is more dangerous for elderly with comorbidities to venture out. So there are a lot of issues in terms of vulnerable people. For instance, in many companies like ours, globally, what we have done is that we have said that any employee who's categorized as a vulnerable employee, diabetes, hypertension, coronary heart disease, cancer, immunocompromised people, they will not come to work. So when we come back to work, the people who come in first are the able-bodied people. The people who come in last will be the vulnerable people. So there is a different strategy of fighting with a virus like this, about which we know very little. In spite of 6 months passing now, every day we get to see a new thing. Formerly, we thought that only cough and fever and chest pain and breathlessness were the symptoms. Now people are presenting with other symptoms. Early loss of smell, early loss of taste. It affects the virus. We now understand that it binds to ACE receptors, which are present not only in the respiratory system, but also in the gastrointestinal and the nervous system. People are presenting with stroke. You find strange stories of doctors jumping out and committing suicide, whether it is in New York or Russia. You start to wonder about sinister plots, but there's nothing sinister about it. Some of these really bind themselves to the nervous system, and they alter your mechanism inside your nervous system. So depression, suicidal thoughts, these are all quite common now.
Yeah. So although the government during this lockdown period, the government has ramped up the health infrastructure and the testing facilities, but so we would like to know your views on this availability of PPE, including the hazmat suits and N95 respirator masks, which are in short supply, and this will be exacerbated if you and when large number of citizens are infected.
Yes. Yeah, you see, this is a matter of great concern. In fact, in many hospitals, even whether it's in Maharashtra or in other parts of India, high quality PPE stuff is a matter of great concern. It's not enough just to have PPE. They have got to be quality tested because they genuinely offer the protection. So therefore, now what most hospitals which take care of their people in a good manner are giving them N95 masks. On top of it, they are giving them a face shield, so that if there are splashes from the patient or other droplet infections, you don't get it. Then you have a full body suit which is given to them, double layer of nitrile gloves to wear, even an overall over the shoes, so that a study has shown that the sole of the shoe, which is, 2 to 3 millimeters, which is 2 to 3 millimeters thick, is actually protecting you. So therefore, now what most hospitals are doing are giving them N95 masks. On top of it, they are giving them a face shield, so that if there are splashes from the patient or other droplet infections, you don't get it. Then you have a full body suit which is given to them, even an overall over the shoes, so that used by the doctor inside an ICU or something has got the maximum concentration of the virus. So obviously people are shedding out viruses. It stays on surface, as we know, for quite a long time. It can settle on plastic and survive on it for almost 6 days. That's the maximum it survives. On the floor, it can survive for 2 or 3 days. So all these are very important in terms of understanding that personal protective measure is the most important thing. We are in short supply, but mercifully, various organizations, including the defense, DRDO and all, they are producing now in a big manner. So hopefully within a month or so, I believe that we should not have that critical shortage, but it's just a hope. But right now we are in short supply of N95 masks as well as other personal protective equipment, which is what is bothering all the doctors also.
Yeah. There is the shortage of the supply of the healthcare workers also. And if
Yes.
we lose our healthcare workers either because of COVID or anything else, because of some assaults on the healthcare workers, and they are catching this COVID while serving the people of India.
Yeah.
So, like in Maharashtra also, they have
Yes.
they have advised all the private doctors also to come and do the 50 days
Yeah.
this duty for the COVID.
Yeah.
So how do you think, sir, this healthcare workers they need to be protected?
See, healthcare workers need to be protected by a personal protective equipment. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Just 1 second, Sandeep. Just give me a minute. I just need to 1 minute. Yeah. Can you hear me, Sandeep?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah. You had muted me, so I couldn't do much. So sorry. You were asking me something. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just asking how we can protect the healthcare workers while fighting with this COVID pandemic.
See, the most important thing is that you actually, you need to ensure that they get all the personal protective measures. The other thing is that when they do the shift jobs and all, some people are doing inordinately long hours. They are doing 12 hours and stuff like that. We need to have a very flexible policy where somebody works only for 6 hours or something and then doesn't work more. Because what is happening among the healthcare workers is that there's an enormous amount of strain dealing with people, dealing with patients. And normally, this is all very sick patients on ventilators and stuff like that. So there's a huge amount of strain, not only physically, but also mentally. So we need to be rational in terms of using them. So you use them at a stretch for 7 hours a day or 6 hours a day for 14 days. You give them an off of another 14 days. You need to find ways of rotating their job as well as easing the stress on them. And also let them do the job which they know best. Somebody who doesn't know much about emergency medicine, you put him in an ICU to help somebody, is not going to add much value. So you need to be very clear on what sort of healthcare workers. Today, the government of Maharashtra, for instance, has asked every medical officer to come back, except those over the age of 55. Now, many of them would not be able to do the sort of work which is required for them. So where do you place them? In what sort of positions you place them so that they help the hospital and the association, as well as they do what they are best capable of doing. We can't compromise on skills. At the same time, we can't have people who are not trained to do these sort of jobs. So it's got to be a judicious mix of both looking at their workload and assigning them to the right place at the right time. But overall, healthcare workers is the huge problem in India. We know the ratio of doctors, the ratio of nurses and all. And now the demands are going to actually peak. At least in some states, it's going to peak much more. And those are the states which will really have the brunt of this. So what else can be done? If there's a state, and this is just an idea for the policymakers to consider, if there are a few states where this is at a very low ebb, those states can actually, depute their doctors to work in other states where there's a problem. This is the time for collaboration and cooperation between states.
Yes. So there is a huge population in India, who are either self-employed or dependent on the daily wages for the subsistence.
Yeah.
So what is your advice as a public health expert for them during this COVID situation?
You
How,
see, this is more of an economical sort of a thing. If they are dependent on daily wage, where are they going to get their square meals from? Many people, especially so many migrants who have come from different parts of the world and different parts of India to work in some states and all. You have seen their plight. They live from hand to mouth, and they only thrive on what they get, on a daily basis. From that, they save something and send it back to their families also. The government, of course, has done a great job in transferring monies into their direct account, through various schemes and all. But at the end of the day, what happens is that I believe that if an employer is employing them, they should actually take care of them during this period. That's my personal belief. All of us, who have got drivers, cooks, part-time servants, maids and all, we should ensure that while they're not doing any work, next 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, 1 year, no matter whatever the period, we need to take care of them. It's a responsibility of every citizen to take care of other people during this time. And similarly, if there's a construction activity going on, and there are 10,000 workers who are working there in that particular site or a complex or whatever, it's the employer who has to take care of them. But of course, there is a problem. Employers will feel the crunch, but this is not the time to lay off people and say that because otherwise it would be a huge economic catastrophe, would be far more than a COVID related catastrophe. So there's a need for everybody to pull in and say that, look, we will take care of the people who work for us. That's the only way forward.
yeah. And so the keeping the public well informed about the government policies and the directives, that is very important, and the consistent and credible communication, it needs to be provided to the necessary public, and so that they can take proper actions, and it will also allay the fears and the panic among the population.
Yeah.
So what are your views and how we can reach up to that down this population?
You see, it is very important to tell the population, about the virus, how it is spread, what happens, what precautions they should take, what they should be doing, what they should not be doing. And I don't see that communication happening. And all of you know that in Tamil Nadu, a doctor who was treating patients, when he died, the poor fellow was not even allowed a decent burial. His ambulance was stoned. All the people were stoned. The people who came to bury him had to run away, leaving the body, come back with the police escort and quickly do it. This is all pathetic because people don't know, how this spreads, what happens, how far, they should worry about certain things and all. If these sort of communications are forthcoming to the people, even when we say, it is very bad and it's going to be a lockdown, you all stay home, unless people are told in details how this spread, what happens, what does it affect, how quickly you can get into a sort of a situation where you can't even breathe. This communication mechanism, while corporates may be doing to their employees, I am really not sure if public health authorities are communicating in that significant manner to the rest of the country, because you see a huge divide. And this is not a problem only in India. If you look at other countries also, whether it is the US where Trump actually wants people to come back, certain governors want people to come back. When the mayor is wanting them to come back, the governor says no. When the governor says yes, the mayor says no. In Brazil, the president openly goes and says that I don't believe in all this. So it is very important for leadership at the governmental level, at the state level, to come out and say, this is what is important. So after this incident happened in Tamil Nadu, the health minister said, no, now we will go and, tell people not to worry. It doesn't spread this way or that way. So don't worry, let them bury it and all. Because the villagers, at the end of the day, I don't blame them. They were very scared that if you bury a body there, then, everything will come out from there and infect their entire village. They will all get killed. So ignorance is more a problem of why some countries are not able to come to grips with it or control it. Two things are very important. One is, whether we like it or not, religious leaders play a huge part. Many parts of India, huge swathes of population are swayed by their gurus or their maulvis or whatever it is. So if it comes from the ramparts of religious leaders that, this is important, please maintain your distance, please wear a mask, please don't spit anywhere, have a cough etiquette. These are all very, very important messages. If that happens, it will only help for the lockdown to succeed. Otherwise, everybody will be doing what they want, thinking that, this is something not for us.
So during this lockdown period, even the non-COVID people, non-COVID patients, they are stuck up inside the houses, and government has issued guidelines for telemedicine.
Yeah.
So how important and how is it? Um, how it will help the technology will help in consultation and this for the care of the non-COVID patients when they can't visit the doctors for follow-ups.
Yeah, this is very important. I'll tell you what happened in the UK when the National Health Service was under great stress and still is under great stress. The NHS, the government of UK actually allowed them to consult virtual GPs. So there's a package called the Babylon in the UK where you can consult a virtual GP. He actually talks to you over the phone from your symptoms, understands what it is, comes to a differential diagnosis, and then says that this is what you need to do and all. And even prescriptions are ordered on that, and it's a huge success. So I don't see why telemedicine can't work in India. The only reason is that what is happening is that I understand there has been a Supreme Court directive quite some time back that doctors can't prescribe on phone and stuff like that. So we need to be pragmatic and understand that this is the way it's going to be happening. And in fact, in conditions like COVID, where you can actually ask people about the symptom and understand what is happening. For instance, I would always advise that if somebody is under quarantine, give them an oximeter if they are at home quarantine. There's nothing wrong in giving an oximeter. Your doctor can talk to you on the phone and find out if your oxygen level has come down to less than 94. And if there are no other conditions, which could have caused that, he's going to be worried. He's going to tell you then, maybe we need to get into a hospital. So I think telemedicine has come of age. A lot of dermatologists actually practice a lot of telemedicine, even with or without the COVID, where you just take a photograph of what's happening and send it to your derm and then make a diagnosis. So there are various ways and means of doing it. You can actually do a virtual physical examination on telemedicine. If somebody has a backache and you want to do an SLR, you can do it on telemedicine. There's nothing wrong with it. There are hundreds of things which can be done on telemedicine. And I think its time has actually come. Of course, it's not a replacement for the actual thing, but under these circumstances, you can at least make out what is happening.
So any timelines for the treatment and
in the treatment, the only treatment which has been approved by the FDA as an emergency use authorization is remdesivir. Remdesivir has shown to shorten the duration of hospital stays from 15 days to 11 days, and that is statistically significant. However, my personal belief is that as I read through various scientific reports, remdesivir has not been given in the right dosage for all these people because of a huge shortage. So I'm not sure if remdesivir is given in the right dosage as it should be given, will it really be a game changer? Even if it is not, what it does is that it has found a chink in the armor of this virus. And through that, it will help if other sorts of therapies along with remdesivir also come in. The other day, I asked your guest about monoclonal antibodies. That's in a huge state of development. Israel has actually developed a monoclonal antibody from the plasma cell. They have cloned, the proteins and the nucleic acid of this particular virus. And that along with remdesivir, if you inject it into a person, maybe that will have a huge effect. Hydroxychloroquine at present, the trials are still on. The jury is still out, even though the ICMR gives it as a prophylaxis to everybody. We're still not sure whether it's working or it doesn't work. Same is the case with azithromycin. There are other drugs which are under use like toxicomab and other ones which are actually more of an anti-inflammatory. Formerly it was felt the steroids are not of much use. Now people feel the steroid is also of use. And on the issue of ventilator, now there's an entire school of thoughts which say that by ventilating a person forcefully, you are damaging the lungs more because you're not understanding the pathology of what is happening. It is fine that the fluids are collecting inside and all, but it is now believed that this virus causes microemboli across the surface of the respiratory symptom, and therefore people are now combining toxicomab along with heparin. Now all these combinations, I think we will find a way, in the next 3-4 months, it should be very interesting to find out which works best, which does not. Some centers claim plasma cell therapy works, others claim that they do not work. The jury is still out on many of these things. But on vaccines, I think there is hope. There are 5 vaccines which have been licensed for clinical trials. Some of them are in phase 2 trials and very, very promising, including the Oxford vaccine. The Oxford vaccine is a bit novel in the sense that it uses the old adenovirus sort of a strain from a chimpanzee, and then it takes the spike protein out of the current coronavirus and puts it into the adenovirus. So it's more like an RNA-based sort of a therapy. Trials have already started in the UK. They have enrolled 3,000 people. People have actually started manufacturing the vaccine even in India in the hope that this trial is going to be successful. Serum Institute has started manufacturing and they say that the risk is ours. If it doesn't work, we'll junk it, but we believe it's going to happen. If that happens, you could have a vaccine as early as January or February. Otherwise, we have to wait for the other vaccines for which clinical trials are going on. So like I said, 5 are undergoing clinical trials, 71 are undergoing preclinical trials. So there are a range of permissions given by WHO for all these trials. We are hopeful, but this is going to take time.
So for another 3 to 4 months, we have to strictly adhere to the public health measures, basically. Or,
Absolutely no alternative.
yeah,
And I'm not saying that people should stay in fear and stay at home. But if you do need to go out, let us say, don't use public transport. It's
yeah,
it's very clear. Use personal private transport as far as possible, and ensure that if you have a driver, he wears a mask, you wear a mask. If you are an air conditioner in the car, preferably keep it to draw the air from outside and do not circulate your air inside, or better keep your windows open. So many things which we have to literally change the way in which we are leading our lives at present. The entire concept of how we practice and play and work and all is going to change drastically. For most people, office working will become the norm. Officers are also understanding that people are far more productive, because you look at it this way: which Saturday did we actually spend? Almost every Saturday now Delhi has got some Zoom conference or the other. All of us are here, we are working, and even otherwise, when you work from home, you start in the morning with your calls. I do my global calls right through the day, because my time zones in the US and in Brazil and other places are different. I think every day I work till 9, 9:30, 10 some days. So it is crazy. So we also need to understand that while working from home, it may sound exciting for some time, but we need to get back the semblance of a work-life balance. So there's got to be a time when we understand that, look, this is killing and this cannot be done. But employers are very smart. They are seeing the productivity is actually gone up. So you will find that many people would ask you to start working from home as a matter of norm.
yeah, sir. Considering the whole scenario of this COVID-19, now how India can show leadership in addressing this COVID-19?
See, India is already showing a great degree of leadership, and I can think that, and I also know that whether it is in terms of cooperation, India is a part of the multicentric WHO trials, whether it is for drugs or whether it's for vaccine. India is a part of that. India is also showing leadership by actually sending out, protective wear, personal protective equipments to other neighboring countries, especially in SAARC. I think Prime Minister Modi took a great initiative and a lead in sending this out. We are also the biggest suppliers of pharmaceuticals across the world. All generic drugs, most of them, whether it's the US or whether it's the Brazilian president has to use the name of Hanuman to get some drugs from us. Trump threatened us in a manner, cajoled us in a manner, he got the drugs from us. So we have enough capacity to produce pharmaceutical. We are the pharmaceutical capital of the world. We are very good in terms of reverse engineering. Tomorrow, if Remdesivir patent is taken off, I'm sure that many companies in India will produce it at a much, much cheaper price. So these are all our technological strengths which we have. The ability to make in India, especially pharmaceutical. So leadership is already there in many manners. Our scientists, believe me, are second to none in terms of developing a cure and all. So it is not that we don't have scientists. It is not that we don't have the technological capability of pharmaceuticals. It is just that our investment in public health over the last few decades has been abysmally low. We have hardly spent 1.5% of our GDP on public health, and that has come to hurt us now. This will give us an opportunity to really strengthen public health. This will also give an opportunity to people like us, all of us. People ask me, occupational health physicians, how do we add value to business? I said, this is the time. Use the crisis as an opportunity. Show what you can do for your organization. These are the times when occupational health physicians, as we go across, they will be in huge demand. But the only thing which I would like our group to do is to ensure that people are paid decently. There have been advertisements for epidemiologists from Bangalore and all offering 25,000 per month, which I thought was, very pathetic. So government should be made to understand the importance of public health, of epidemiology, of doctors. This is the time for us as an association to make an impact.
Uh, I would like to ask you, sir, what the role IUH can play during this COVID-19 pandemic, sir?
See,
Because
as
we are in a lead role. And, yeah.
yeah, yeah. You see, as IOH, many of us have taken part in external seminars also, educating people. And we can still do the same, whether it is through FICCI or through CII, educating people, our own organization, setting in place, best practices. The other thing, of course, we were also discussing the other day with Chanbag and others is that like we came out with the guideline on immunization, which is very useful to the entire industry, we should be able to do something like that. We have a multi-collaborative sort of a platform now. There are a lot of stalwarts in different branches, whether it is Delhi, Chennai, Mumbai, or everywhere. We should put our heads together, and we could actually be a think tank which sends in a paper to the government in terms of what do we do, because this is far from over right now. This is the time maybe for us to talk to the government authorities, whether it is state government or the central government, and say, look, this is how we can actually help sound public health principles to be able to bring this under control. And there's a future after COVID also. We need to plan for that, the world after COVID.
Yeah, that is great, sir. So these were the questions from my side. I would request you to please take these questions in the chat.
Where is this? Okay, I will just open the chat. I'll just see it. Okay. So, just trying to go to the first question. Okay. Somebody has, Govind Narke has asked about herd immunity. Now,
yeah.
this concept of herd immunity is very nice to actually think that we will have herd immunity. But for a case like coronavirus, which has a reproductive factor of almost 3, to get a herd immunity, you would need 50 to 60% of the people to have this immunity. And you saw what happened in the UK. When they first started out to get a herd immunity, it decimated many people. They had to quickly beat back from their strategy of letting it infect the community so that they develop a natural herd immunity, and they went back into the time-tested methods of quarantine, isolation, and testing and stuff like that. So herd immunity is possible, but it will be possible at a great cost to all of us. So I'm not saying it won't happen. In the places which were the worst affected, they did a serological survey and they found that in places like New York and all, the number of people who have got some sort of an immunity by antibody tests, which are also not that great, is just around 20% or so. Not enough to give a herd immunity at this stage. So my concern is only that, do we need to pay a high price for herd immunity? The answer is obviously no. We can't be having, the sort of deaths which is happening in New York and other places. Tomorrow, for instance, in Bombay, if 50,000 people die, it will be a huge catastrophe. And we still can't guarantee herd immunity within that place because the borders are porous, people will walk in, people will go through. Herd immunity is also more important where you have a circumscribed area. In a country like India, you have green zones right now where people don't have immunity. How will they get the herd immunity? It's very difficult. So the only way for us forward is that we find a treatment, we find a vaccination. Vaccination is the best way of giving immunity to people. Then there's a question on mutation of the virus. See, there's a lot of confusion about mutation. What is happening currently in the virus is that the WHO and everybody say that this is a very stable and a steady virus. It does not mutate. You will have different strains, but there are minor variation in the genetic component, nothing great that, this virus has mutated into something else. Therefore, people are still hopeful that you can have a vaccine which covers all these strains. It is not mutating to that extent. Then what about hydrochloroquine use? Not yet proven. It is still in the realms of speculation. ICMR has given it to doctors, but I know that many senior doctors, even in Mumbai, who are handling COVID patients are not taking it because they're not really sure about what is going to happen. There are, of course, side effects if you give both HCQ and azithromycin together, but more than the side effect, there is no guarantee that, this is actually going to support us or work. Then the other question is, will BCG vaccination help? Well, that's a very, hypothetical question. It is believed that all of us in India, many of us who have got BCG vaccine are actually having some degree of immunity against it. And there was one interesting map which was interspread, areas of coronavirus and areas where malaria are there across the world. And it was found that the sub-Saharan belt and India and all, malaria is there. So therefore, we don't have much of an infection in Africa or here. But none of them have proven. The WHO has not proven anything about, any of this stuff, whether it is malaria or tuberculosis. There are now trials being conducted about revaccination with BCG. We have to wait for their result. Then the next question is, do you think herd immunity is already set in the country? My answer to that is no, we have not. I'll tell you one thing, that everywhere, wherever testing is done, you must, as a rough rule of the thumb, understand that 10 times more people would have been infected. But even that is not enough to give herd immunity. For a virus like this, you actually need around 60% of the population, which means all the youngsters, below the age of 45 or 50, if they develop immunity, you can protect your elders. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very difficult. Can routine surgery be started in private hospital? What should be protocol? Of course, it should be. The only advice which I would give anybody who is doing a surgery is that practice universal precaution. Like if somebody with HIV/AIDS, what do? You do the surgery, yeah? But you practice universal precaution. Treat every patient as a COVID patient where community transmission is happening, and don't insist on get this certificate, get that certificate and all. Speaker need to stop screen share. That has been done. Your opinion on the use of ventilators in SARI. I told you, the ventilator usage may be good in terms of acute respiratory distress, infection and stuff like that. But here, the jury is still out whether ventilators actually, in a lung which is already weakened, you pump in at a great force, what is going to happen to the lung? So there are some studies now going on about the use of ventilators, a huge study in New York. And once those results come in, maybe in the end of 1.5 months, we will have an idea about whether how useful it is. Virus mutated in India. There are strains. Yeah, we still don't believe it is mutated. Some strains like the L strain and the S strain and all. The L one is supposed to be more dangerous, which is what is probably circulating in Gujarat. Yeah. We have shown rapid kits against the. Could it be reverse, or let's say this about the RT-PCR is positives and something. Yeah. Uh, okay, I told you one thing very clearly that most RT-PCR tests are positive to the tune of 75 to 80%. So therefore, what happens is that in many cases, as a surrogate of this, people sometimes do the test and also a CT scan of the chest, which is a very, very early sign of picking up what sort of an infection you have. If your CT scan shows a typical thing, which is very common with COVID-19, and this is the experience from the early trials, early clinical features, even in China, where people did not do the RT-PCR, they went straight for a CT scan of the chest. And they found that it affects the lungs in a huge manner. That is one way of doing it. Sweden is believing only in herd immunity. See, Sweden is not believing only in herd immunity. What they are doing is they're very sensible, and their people are also sensible. Like I told you, the government and the public health authorities can do a lot. But if we are not sensible, and if we behave in a different manner, if we don't practice social distancing, if we don't wear masks in public, if you don't follow cough etiquette, then what can the government do? So they're just protecting, and the virus will die out. If it can't find another person, the virus is going to die out. They may not get herd immunity, but they are doing good in terms of non-pharmaceutical interventions. Then Indian corporates would have a big toll in terms of expenditures to each associates and cost towards workplace sanitization. This is not a huge cost to play. You know, in the sense, this is part of taking care of your people. In fact, the government mandated CSR 2%, which is happening, is actually helping the government in a big manner. For instance, we as locally in India, there's Hindustan Lever, we are given around 100 crores. And same would be true for many of your companies, you know, in terms of buying ventilators, donating it to governments. Globally, Unilever has given 100 million pounds. You know, we have purchased around 5,000 ventilators and we have sent it to places like Latin America and Africa for use by the people. We have just purchased 75,000 RT-PCR kits, and we have offered it to governments across the world, including India. We have just offered ICMR some 30,000 kits so that they can give it to their laboratory. So I think people are using their CSR funds in a manner where they can help society. And somebody says thank you, so thank you to you also. Then asymptomatic oxygen saturation, I spoke about it. Yes, you know, especially for people in quarantine, give them an oximeter. It's just like a glucometer which you normally use at home and all. So there's nothing wrong in that. How do we address the workplace risk of a frontline healthcare worker staying with him as his family? Okay, the frontline healthcare worker, whosoever stays with the family, you know, when he goes into the place of work, I assume he would have all the necessary personal protective wear. People come back home, they know the way of, you know, how do they get back home? Whether removing their shoes outside, getting it out, getting into a thing, taking a bath, thoroughly washing yourself, using a sanitizer and all. So I wouldn't worry very much about, you know, these people, they know how to take care of themselves. Then employee coming from outstation after traveling, keep him out for 14 days. Very simple. Anybody who travels and comes, please quarantine him. In fact, now we even believe that if within the country, if you are traveling from a high risk to a low risk zone, at the low risk zone, keep the person out for 14 days. And also keep a watch on signs and symptoms. If somebody has not traveled out, and even within your own place, coming to the office after these easement lifts, if somebody has cough, if you are using thermal screening at the workplace, you're able to pick up fever of more than 38.5 degrees Celsius, tell the person to be away. You know, we have to be very prudent here. So I think that's about all, Sandeep, in terms of the questions from the chat.
So I think, sir, most of the questions and the queries which we were having in our minds and in the minds of all the participants, they have been clarified, and your views we have taken your views, and how we'll go about with this COVID pandemic in our industry, at our workplaces, at our residences, and in the society, that the many things are clear, and the questions which we were having, they have been clarified by you, sir. And now to make this discussion more lively, and many senior people are there in this group, they would like to interact you personally. So I would unmute all of them, but I would request all of them to mute themselves, themselves only, and they should unmute one by one if you want to interact with Dr. Rajgopal.
told him
Yeah,
very
please.
clearly that look,
Anyone who
this
wants
is a
to ask some
situation which the
questions?
whole world is facing, and everybody has to take some part of the loss.
The place is not
Only
open
one
only.
person cannot. Why should
A lot of people.
why should only we bear the loss?
They will protect the
What I'm
interest.
saying, ma'am. That is what I'm saying. Everybody has to bear the loss. We can't say that only we should take the loss.
The
And we will.
issue with, well, like you have dented
But
India
I was going to
versus
talk
the
to you,
world,
but he has to first
how the
agree to
world
that. Nah,
is
otherwise, how do I?
So there was a lot of disturbances because everyone was asking. So can we do one thing, sir? Anyone who wants to raise some question, he can just raise his hand. They can go in that participant, or they can just raise their hands in that. I will unmute them one by one. Dr. Rajiv Jain wants to ask some
not
questions.
us. There are two issues which I felt are relevant at this point of time, which have been actually during the last 2 days, that the happenings have shown. One, the issue of safety in plants, manufacturing plants, especially chemical plants,
Yeah.
which have not been operated for last 45 days.
Yes.
And now government pressurizing them to open. So that during that pressure, sometimes occupational safety can be
Of course.
compromised.
Of course. I would think
That issue is relevant for at our forum, I feel.
Yeah, I think, Rajiv, what is important is that many of these process safety parameters which need to be taken into account when you open, there are some standard ways of doing it. And what has happened, I think, in the case of this Vizag plant is that those standard process safety parameters have not been followed. First of all, the most important thing is when you get into a lockdown mode in a plant and where only a limited amount of activity is allowed, you have something called as a hazard and operability study, the HAZOP and the HAZAN study. You need to have an absolute laid down manner of what HAZOPs are you doing before shutting and before after opening. I think that is very important. Somebody has taken a huge shortcut in it, because even if a valve leaks, there are countermeasures, in terms of neutralizing the gas. You would have antidotes in terms of, you don't have to rush with chemicals from Delhi to neutralize it. I read somebody went with a lot of chemicals to neutralize it. Now the horse has bolted. What are you going to neutralize there? There's nothing left. It's all dissipated into the atmosphere. So if your hazard operability study and hazard studies are fine, and you have something called as a black book in people who practice chemical safety. If your black book lays down that these are the structured ways in which I'm going to do things, this sort of thing would never happen. So this is sheer carelessness on the part of the plant engineers and on the part of plant safety. They have taken it for granted. Chalta hai, baad mein aake khulenge, kuch nahi hoga, and that's the whole problem. So this is to do with safety. It's nothing to do with lockdown and stuff like that. You will have lockdowns. You will have this sort of thing. There could be a natural catastrophe. You have to build your plant to be idiot-proof and fail-proof. The fault has to lie with the factory management and their engineers that they did not anticipate that this sort of a thing would be happening.
And the related issue is epidemiology.
Yeah.
General epidemiology and occupational epidemiology is one of the weakest link, which has been exposed so dramatically during the last 2-3 months. No government in India, the state governments have no capacity, no people who can advise them on data. Now the related issue is data. How the data is generated, who reads them, do they have the capacity to interpret the data? Do they have the capacity to actually have credentials so that policymakers, including politicians and bureaucrats, understand? Because data interpretation and communication are linked issues. In India, that is the weakest link, and this ICMR also is finding very difficult to actually handle the data which is available. If you would see the example of Delhi, the pendency of reports at the moment is about 5,000, meaning thereby the samples which were taken about 7 days back, the reports are not available. So how can we expect containment strategy to function on the ground? Look at Mumbai, Maharashtra, same issue has been coming up. The containment measures tracing has been shown to be through data only insufficient, and that's why the problem is getting multiplied in especially Mumbai, which is going to be catastrophic the days to come with the kind of population as you mentioned in your presentation, how catastrophic this could be. So what would be the solution then?
We just hope that the containment strategy, which, there's been a reshuffle and a change of the guard in Mumbai, of people who are directing and handling this at the top level, IAS officers and all. What we are hoping is that a public health policy which is sound on ground. They've got good advisors, but they don't listen to them. There are people who advise them, infectious disease specialists, good public health experts. They don't listen to them. They just do what they want because they believe that, this is the way it should be done. So hopefully in high density population, instead of trying to contain it there only, they will have to take out contacts of positive cases and quarantine them elsewhere. Otherwise, you tell them you stay inside, I will give you food and everything. It doesn't work that way. And people, everybody, for 500 people, there are 3 toilets. So people have to stand in line. Where is social distancing? You can't do it. You have to take out people from there and put them in another zone. You must have a strategic way of looking at alternatives. You cannot do it the same way and hope that one day it will become okay. So we are hoping that now the modus operandi of handling this will change. Let's see.
And the last issue which I want to raise is the deaths. The kind of graph that was shown regarding deaths, it is very clear that the deaths occurring out of the hospitals are not being counted, which does not happen in UK or USA. All deaths get documented. In India, that is the biggest death, and that is why you're getting a graph of deaths very low compared to other countries.
So therefore, we don't, graph only tells you what is known, but it doesn't tell you the underlying thing. Number one, in any case, crude fatality rate is hardly an indicator. It doesn't talk about comorbidities. It doesn't talk about age. It doesn't talk about anything. It doesn't standardize anything. Also, in places like Calcutta, they don't label a COVID death. If somebody has a comorbidity, they say he died because of the comorbidity. So obviously our deaths are high. Our cases are even higher. We must go by that assumption.
Dr. Govind Narke wants to say something, sir.
Yeah.
Hello, sir. When the operation starts, when the people start coming to work, so we should, what is the importance of doing the thermal scan, doing the pulse oximetry, taking undertaking from them? Yeah, I'm not suffering from any cough, cold, fever. People have started doing that. So is it useful or should...
Routine pulse oximetry is not useful, but thermal screening while entering is a good discipline, because you need people to be aware also from a psychological point of view that the organization is taking care of you. And we believe that you should take care of yourself. Taking a declaration that you don't have symptoms is good. And if they have symptoms, you must ask them to get back. And I come back to the same point which I told. When you start back, keep vulnerable employees away till everything is still better. Don't let them come in first. That's the most important thing. Inside the office, you will have to now remodel your office. It's called the 6x6 rule. No 2 persons close to each other by 6 feet. If you have walkways, you can't have people walking and crossing at the same time. In the factories, forklifts can't cross. You need to have one path for entry and the other path for exit. You will have to remodel your office in many ways. You will have to look at your canteen. How many people can sit on one table? Do you need staggered timings? It's going to be a new world after we come back. It will not be business as usual.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Now, I would request Dr. Shanbhag to say something, sir.
Thanks, Sandeep. And Raj, it's great been interacting with you. Great information you have given. I just wanted one information to be shared by me, and the second is one question to you. Today only I read that Lancet has published a report yesterday that interferon B as a backbone, beta 1 as a backbone, and triple antiviral combination of lopinavir, ritonavir, and ribavirin have shown great results. They have published a phase 2 trial yesterday, and they are very, very hopeful that this is going to be helpful. If this is given within the first 7 days of the testing positive, it's given great results. It is 127 patient in hospital patient trial they have published yesterday. So just trying to tell you that this is the latest which I read today. So that is one information I've chosen to share. Second thing is, just wanted to check with you, in Mumbai, the recovery rate is, Mumbai in Maharashtra basically, the recovery rate is only slightly less than 19-20%. Why is it so? What are we doing wrong that the recovery rate is not there? We say that 70% people who are asymptomatic or very mild symptoms. Why should the recovery rate be very low? I do not understand. So just wanted to have your views on that.
Shanbhag, I'm not sure how they are measuring the recovery.
That's what I'm saying.
is it by RT-PCR? You know, what is happening is that now recent studies have actually shown that the virus can continue to stay for 43 days and you will still occasionally be picking it up by RT-PCR. So symptomatic recovery is what we should actually be looking at. Now the world is coming around to this view that just doing 2 tests of RT-PCR one day apart is not even accurate. The latest report says that you do it, you may find it is negative, but the virus is still on. And the virus sometimes gets picked up even when it is not active, like they picked it up in Korea. So we know very little about the sort of a thing. It all depends on how you define a recovery rate. So I'm not knowing whether the recovery rate definition is standard across India or
That's what.
doing in some other manner. So it could be semantics in terms of definition and how they look at it. But I would believe that if you have discharged the patient, if he has should be fever-free, symptom-free for 3 days without medication. That is the criteria for recovery, whether it is CDC or WHO.
No, only thing, Raj, the all India recovery rate is about 30%.
Yeah.
And why in Maharashtra or Mumbai it is only less
That's why I honestly don't have an answer.
than 20%. I just can't reconcile the figures.
Yeah, we probably need to look deeper into this, whether it is to do with definition of a recovery, how some states are defining recovery. Some people must just be feeling that, you get out of a hospital, you're symptom free, and you have spent the time, you are recovered. Other people must be using some other methods, because obviously you can't have ill people floating around. So
that is not right. Now, for all India, you should have the same standard.
You should have the same standard. But I will check this out. Right now, I don't know the answer, but I will check this out. What is the difference in recovery rate definition between, let's say, maybe somebody else in the audience would have an answer about what is happening in terms of recovery rate. How do they actually judge this?
Dr.
I would still believe that it's to do with the semantics of definition. Sorry, Sandeep.
Dr. Pingle, would you like to say something, sir? Dr. Shyam Pingle?
Actually, it has been a wonderful presentation and the interaction was excellent. He has answered many questions, but he has also given a lot of new information. So I don't have much to add to it, except what he has already said is let's not believe too much in the herd immunity thing. You know that 3% is the death rate and we have 1.3 billion plus population. So how many people will die? We just can't afford it. Second is, I think too much stress is being put on that India is not testing enough. That also is misplaced. Of course, we do have resource constraints and from 5,000, we have already gone up to 75,000 plus per day testing. Will increase further. But given the fact that there are many outside also who are not tested and who are positive and like the reports that we get is there are number of total deaths have significantly jumped up. And we do not know the cause or the mortality. In anyway, in India, only 20% cases mortality is certified with cause of death. So in this situation, what we have to do is we have to do containment, we have to do tracing wherever we find the contacts, and we should go ahead. Overall, it has been a wonderful session.
Regarding recovery rate, I would like to inform the problem, and this has been partially handled and solved yesterday evening. Earlier, the definition of recovery was 2 RT-PCR samples within 24 hours, turning negative. Now, if you have reporting time being prolonged, naturally reporting, recovery rate will be high. Here, what has happened now, the definition of fit to discharge is changed. You don't need a test now. 3 days of no fever is sufficient to discharge a patient. This has been done yesterday, and the document is available on Ministry of Health website. So this will get adjusted.
Yeah, very good, Rajiv. That's what I was telling, that, the way we look at it internationally is you have had 7 days of, treatment or 8 days of treatment. After that, you stop the treatment and you are symptom free for 72 hours without the use of medication. That is your recovery. And soon this RT-PCR of 24 hours will undergo a change because of the finding that the virus still persists. So, it's neither here nor there. So most people won't use RT-PCR, this 2 days thing. They would just go by the symptomatology and the recovery.
Dr. Sandeep, Dr. Shanbhag want to speak.
Yeah. So,
Shanbhag, you are on mute.
Yeah, I'll do it.
No, sir, Dr. Sandeep will do it.
Yeah, okay.
So this was a great session, sir, today.
Yeah.
And
Dr. Shanbag wanted to say something.
yeah, I'm just doing it, sir. So, and since psychological health and your, because during lockdown, your mental health and other things, they all need to be taken care of. I had requested Dr. Shiva to take a session sometimes next week. I'll send a formal mail to him, and he will just get back to us. So he will be our next speaker for that. And Dr. Shanbag wants to say something. Yes. Yeah.
You know, Rajiv, I agree with you that yesterday the definition has changed. But earlier, before change of definition, every state has to follow the same protocol. So my question is very simple. If that is so, why there is a difference between the recovery rate of other states and Maharashtra or Mumbai? That's my simple question.
Because in Maharashtra, the situation is almost on the verge of explosion at the moment. And this is reflected in the data. In fact, Pune is also sitting on a very volcanic situation at the moment. The data, local data, I talked to the ICMR people and the surveillance officers there in Pune as well as Mumbai. Their assessment is very negative.
No, I agree, Rajiv. Everything is fine. I am only saying is 60 to 70% people have no symptoms or mild symptoms. Why should there be a difference in recovery rates? There may be more cases coming up. The recovery rate has to also be matching the same.
I believe 2 weeks back, there was, in fact, ICMR was tracking the genetic makeup of the viruses in Kerala and in Maharashtra as Gujarat. There are rather three streams of the virus which are available in India. Those are the preliminary results, but that needs to be confirmed further. The strains are different. The wave of infection in India has come in 2 waves, and the origin is different. Their pathogenicity and their killing rate or the mortality rate is different. So we will get to know more in the days to come. Gujarat and Maharashtra shall remain a story to be unraveled through extensive genetic analysis, which is being undertaken by ICMR these days. And Department of Biotechnology actually is helping them in this effort.
So the recovery rate also depends upon the time at which they were diagnosed, because 80% of the patients, if they are diagnosed in like the mild or very asymptomatic, then they have a very less viral load and their rate of recovery will be definitely higher. But once they are hiding their problem and they are diagnosed late when they have some breathlessness or they are they are really serious, then at that time the mortality rate will definitely be less. And that is the reason why in West Bengal, Maharashtra and Gujarat, all these cases of fatality have been more, despite the number of cases which are diagnosed. The diagnosed cases, they are more in the later stages of the disease and when the viral load is very high. So that is the reason this mortality rate is different in different.
Anyway, Sandeep, I am not convinced because the maximum testing has been done in Maharashtra.
Yeah, testing has been
in the whole of India. The maximum testing has been done in Maharashtra.
Yeah,
so the positivity will be higher in Maharashtra. If the 60 to 70% are people who are no symptoms or mild symptoms, I personally believe there is some issue with this recovery rates of various places. This is my personal view. I'm still not convinced.
Shanbag,
let us debate it some other time.
Shanbag, I'll tell you some other thing what could be happening. Yeah, and just a thought. These private labs, who are doing all the testing, they are under such a huge load. They are giving reports of even people at the first testing after 2 days and 3 days. I think what must be happening is that if people are recovering and going back home, their RT-PCRs must be coming quite late. That could be another reason, because that's not a priority for them. Maybe that's the reason. I don't know. Yeah. So we'll have to find out.
We'll wait. Like Rajiv said, we will wait for some time to see what pans out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But this is a big mystery for me actually.
So this whole virus is a big mystery for every one of us. In 2-3 months, we are unable to decode a lot of things. Now, Dr. Bobby also wants to say something. Sir.
Yeah.
Dr. Bobby.
Actually, I didn't have anything to say, but wonderful session. I came in very late, but the last few snatches, like I mentioned, were really enlightening. Thank you very much. I have a feeling that it's probably because of the viral loads in the patients who are being tested in Mumbai, which is resulting in poorer recovery rates.
Yeah.
So that's probably the reason. But in addition to which, I think the epidemiological factors also are important. When was the test done? What is your definition of recovery? These have to be factored in as well, which I don't think is standard right now all over the country.
So, thank you, sir. Now, in the last, sir, I would request Dr. Shiva to unmute himself because I have tried to unmute him, but yeah, if he can say something and confirm his participation in the next session, sir.
Yeah, surely.
Yeah.
We'll have it on next Saturday at the same time.
Right, sir. Right, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, surely.
Yeah.
It will be a same type of session.
Yeah.
It will be my pleasure to participate.
Thank you very much, sir. So thank you all very much, all seniors and my colleagues from IOH, all Central Council members. At IOH, we are habituated to the challenges and we are good in crisis time, and we are displaying it again and again. We have adapted very fast to in the change scenario, and with new ways of working, we hope that we will have a better time ahead. So thank you, Dr. Rajgopal, and thank you all everyone for attending this session. Very lively session. See you all next week.
So Sandeep, thank you for the invite, and I had a very good time interacting with all colleagues. Also learned quite a lot from people who participated, and I was very happy to see today that we almost had 70 participants, at the beginning, at the peak. So this was a very interesting sort of an interaction, and delighted that you guys in Delhi have mastered the art of keeping everyone alive even during a lockdown. So thank you for that.
So it's all because of you all only. You are all showing us the path how to we should go ahead in this change scenario. And thank you all very much, sir. And especially thanks to you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Stay safe, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. You all